The air on the international bridge during shift change tasted of exhaust fumes and something metallic, a tang I'd grown too accustomed to. Below, the river, a slick of oil and moonlight, snaked towards the sea. My breath plumed, a ghost in the frigid night. It had been a long time since I'd felt the chill of the wind bite through a worn coat, a long time since I'd stood on the precipice of anything but my own quiet ruin. They'd called me Cole. Once. Now, I was just a shadow clinging to the edges of a life I'd deliberately dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. The city had spat me out, and I hadn't fought it. Why would I? The weight of what I hadn't done, what I'd failed to do, was a constant companion, a silent partner in my self-imposed exile. I traded precinct coffee for lukewarm instant, the hum of the city for the drone of the television, and the sharp edge of justice for the dull ache of regret. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a disruption in the rhythmic ballet of headlights. Not the usual ebb and flow of traffic, but something precise, almost surgical. Then another. No hazard lights, no frantic honking, just an unnerving stillness that pricked at the dormant instincts I'd tried so hard to bury. My hand, without conscious thought, drifted to the inside pocket of my coat. I told myself it was a habit, a tick of the trade I'd left behind. But deep down, a tremor of something else, something akin to anticipation, began to stir. They moved with an economy of motion that spoke of training, of a shared understanding. This was planned, meticulous. A colleague, one of the few who still bothered to call, had mentioned something about a string of high-profile robberies. Sophisticated, he'd said. Untraceable. He dismissed them as the work of a new breed of criminals, slick and bold. One of them produced a device, small and metallic, and held it to the control panel of the bridge's lighting system. The overhead lamps flickered, then died, plunging the immediate section into an inky blackness. A few seconds later, a different set of lights, a soft, localized glow, illuminated the area around the vans. My mind, that old, rusty engine, began to churn. The precision, the timing, the way they'd neutralized the external stimuli, creating their own operating theater. They were targeting the customs booth. Two figures approached the small, reinforced structure, their movements fluid, almost balletic. One produced a cutting torch, its flame a searing blue against the night. The other stood guard, a silhouette against the faint glow of the distant city skyline. I remembered the reports, the meticulous planning, the utter lack of collateral damage, the way the perpetrator had left no trace, no fingerprints, no witnesses. A single, perfectly preserved orchid placed at the scene, a macabre flourish that had haunted my dreams for years. My colleague had brushed off the orchid. A calling card, he'd said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. Some criminals are just theatrical, but I knew better. It wasn't just theatrical, it was a taunt, a declaration. The cutting torch hissed, biting into the metal of the booth. Sparks cascaded, brief, fiery tears in the fabric of the night. A small panel on the booth's side popped open. They weren't smashing their way in. They were peeling back the layers, exposing the heart of the matter with surgical precision. A knot tightened in my chest. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a rehearsal, a performance. And the lead actor, the one I'd never been able to unmask, was back on stage. My fingers traced the cool steel of the pistol tucked beneath my coat. It was a foolish impulse, a betrayal of the life I'd chosen. I was no longer the detective who hunted monsters. I was just Cole, a man drowning in his own past. The orchid. It was him. He was back. And if he was back, then the nightmares, the ones I thought I'd finally buried, were about to claw their way back into the light. The international bridge during shift change, usually a symbol of passage and connection, had become the first act in a terrifying reprise. I was no longer a spectator. The past had reached out and dragged me back into its suffocating embrace. The chill had seeped into my bones, a persistent ache that reminded me of every mistake, every ghost. The international bridge during shift change was a familiar theater of the absurd, a place where duty and desperation played out under the indifferent gaze of sodium lamps. Tonight, however, the usual hum of idling engines and the metallic clang of shifting gears felt amplified, charged with a disquiet I couldn't shake. My own breath, a ragged thing, misted the air, a fleeting testament to my presence in a world I'd tried so hard to leave behind. A crumpled flyer, snagged on a chain-link fence, fluttered like a wounded bird. The image, faded and torn, depicted a smiling woman, her eyes bright with a life extinguished too soon. The same eyes I saw in my nightmares. The same eyes that had haunted the periphery of that other case, the one that had cost me everything. I pulled a glove from my pocket, the worn leather cool against my skin, and carefully plucked the flyer from its perch. The paper was damp, smelling faintly of brine and decay. A name, Elena Vance, was printed beneath the photograph in a neat, almost defiant script. The date of her disappearance 4 years ago was a raw wound. My own thoughts were a jumbled mess, a tangled knot of memory and present reality. This wasn't my jurisdiction anymore. I was a civilian, a shadow of my former self, adrift in the currents of a life I no longer commanded. But the echo of those heists, the unnervingly precise choreography, the chilling signature, it was a siren song I couldn't ignore. It was him, or someone who had studied him, dissected him, and was now wearing his skin like a grotesque mask. I moved away from the main thoroughfare, the rumble of trucks receding as I descended a narrow, concrete stairwell. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, like old oil. This was the underbelly, the forgotten places where the city's refuse accumulated and secrets festered. A single, bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light over a makeshift table in the corner of a cavernous, disused storage unit. On the table lay a scattering of items, a tarnished silver locket, a single, perfectly preserved rose, and a small, leather-bound journal. These were the remnants of Elena Vance, retrieved by a concerned colleague before the official channels had closed the file. My colleague, a woman whose loyalty I'd tested and found wanting, had slipped them to me in a hushed exchange, a silent plea for me to see what she couldn't. I picked up the locket, its surface cool and smooth against my thumb. It sprang open with a faint click, revealing 2 miniature portraits. Elena, younger, her smile unrestrained, and a man whose features were indistinct, blurred by time or intent. I traced the outline of his jaw, a phantom familiarity prickling at the back of my neck. Who was he? A lover? A friend? Or something far more sinister? The rose, though withered, still held a faint, sweet perfume, a stark contrast to the decay that permeated the air. It was a deliberate flourish, a calculated touch. The killer I'd chased had a penchant for such theatricality. He left calling cards, not of evidence, but of meaning. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal. The pages were filled with Elena's elegant script, a testament to a life lived, to hopes and dreams now turned to dust. Most of it was mundane, grocery lists, social engagements, reflections on the changing seasons. Then buried deep within, a passage that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. He watches. I feel his gaze, a constant weight. He knows my routines. He knows my fears. He spoke to me today, River, his voice a low murmur like the tide. He said he admired my strength, my resilience. He said he understood what it was to be unseen. I am afraid, but he is also compelling, a dangerous fascination. My breath hitched. By the river. The international bridge during shift change. The metallic tang in the air. The oil slick on the water. I closed the journal, the leather cool and firm in my grasp. The tension in the room was palpable, a coiled spring waiting to snap. This was no longer just about Elena Vance. This was about a pattern, a terrifying symmetry that pointed a bony finger directly at the ghost that had pursued me for years. And now, it seemed, that ghost had found a new protege. The weight of it settled on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. I was back in the game, whether I wanted to be or not, and the stakes had never been higher. The city breathed a sigh of exhaust and neon. Dusk, that bruised hour, bled across the sky, staining the clouds in hues of bruised plum and dying ember. I stood on the periphery of the scene, a ghost at a wake. The air, thick with the scent of brine and diesel, clung to my skin. The international bridge during shift change was a symphony of grinding metal and distant horns, a familiar cacophony I'd once navigated with a grim sort of purpose. Now, it was a monument to my failure. Police cruisers, their lights painting strobing patterns on the wet tarmac, had converged on the north end of the bridge. Yellow tape, a gaudy ribbon of officialdom, cordoned off the area. A knot of uniformed officers milled about, their faces grim, their movements precise and practiced. I recognized the lean, sharp silhouette of the detective from the precinct, the one with the perpetually furrowed brow and the air of a man wrestling with a particularly stubborn puzzle. He was talking to a uniformed officer, his voice a low murmur carried on the damp wind. I stayed back, a shadow among shadows. The journal, its pages still whispering secrets of the past, was tucked deep within my worn leather jacket. Each entry was a fresh wound, a reminder of the killer I'd hunted, the one whose signature was now impassably reappearing. This wasn't a copycat. This was too precise, too intimate. The detective's gaze swept over the crowd of onlookers, a casual sweep that felt like a spotlight. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition, then dismissal. I was no longer one of them. I was an outsider now, a relic of a case that had broken me. A colleague, his face a mask of professional detachment, emerged from the cluster of officers. He carried a large, clear evidence bag. Inside, I could see a small, intricately carved wooden bird. My stomach clenched. The same type of bird had been left at the scene of the first heist, and the second, a calling card, a taunt. I slipped away before the detective could decide I was worth investigating. I found myself in a dimly lit bar, the kind that smelled of stale beer and regret. The clatter of glasses and the low hum of conversation were a balm, a temporary escape from the relentless pressure. A man approached my table, his face obscured by the low light. He was built like a brick wall, his movements economical. He slid into the seat opposite me, his gaze steady. "Heard you were back in town, Cole." His voice was a gravelly rumble. "Who's asking?" I kept my voice level, my eyes scanning the room, cataloging exits. "Someone who knows what you're looking for, and someone who knows who's giving it to you." He leaned closer, the scent of cheap cologne and something metallic reaching me. "This latest one, the bank, that wasn't just about the money, was it?" I didn't answer. The bank heist, that had been the third, far more audacious than the others. No alarms tripped, no security footage captured, just an empty vault and a single, perfectly placed wooden bird. "They say you're digging into old graves, Cole," the stranger continued, his voice a low purr. "The kind of graves that are best left undisturbed." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "This killer, the one from years ago, he's back, and he's getting bolder." My jaw tightened. "How do you know?" The stranger gave a slow, humorless smile. "Because I hear things. And because the pattern, it's undeniable. The way they bypass security, the almost surgical precision, the signature, it's him, and he's building something. This isn't about random targets anymore. This is a plan. A plan." The journal entries had hinted at a larger objective, a grander design behind the killer's past actions. I dismissed it as paranoia, the ramblings of a broken mind. But now, with these new heists, the pieces were starting to align. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice a low growl. "Information," the stranger said, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "And for you to be careful. The stakes are higher this time, much higher. This isn't just about catching a killer anymore. This is about stopping a catastrophe." He stood, his movement fluid and silent. He left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering scent of something dangerous. The international bridge during shift change, the wooden birds, the meticulously planned heists, they were all connected. And I was caught in the middle, a pawn in a game I was desperate to win, but terrified of losing. The weight of the past pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I had to find out what this killer wanted and why he was using my own ghost to achieve it. The biting wind whipped across the steel expanse of the international bridge during shift change, a familiar sting against my cheeks. It carried the metallic tang of exhaust fumes and the faint, briny whisper of the river below. My collar was turned up, a futile gesture against the relentless chill, but it anchored me, a small, solid thing in the vast, indifferent night. The rhythmic sigh of the departing guard, his silhouette dissolving into the flickering sodium lights, was my only companion. He was gone. My fingers traced the worn leather of my notebook, the pages filled with scrawled observations, disjointed thoughts, and the ghosts of faces I couldn't forget. The wooden birds, the meticulously planned heists, The bridge, a motive beyond simple greed, the stranger had said. I'd replayed the stranger's words 1,000 times since he vanished. The targets aren't random, Cole, they're echoes, and the echoes are getting louder. Echoes? What kind of echoes? Of what? I'd spent the better part of the night poring over the details of the recent string of robberies, the jewelry store on Elm, the rare bookshop downtown, the private collection of antiquities. The jewelry store had been a brazen daylight affair, the security systems bypassed with an elegance that spoke of insider knowledge. The bookshop, a whisper in the dark, the owner discovering the empty display cases only after the dawn. The antiquities, that one still gnawed at me. The owner, reclusive collector, had reported the theft himself, claiming he'd woken to find his most prized possessions gone, not a single lark tampered with. It was as if the items had simply dematerialized. I pulled out my phone, the screen a harsh rectangle of light in the gloom. I scrolled through the reports, cross-referencing dates, times, the subtle variations in modus operandi. The stranger's words echoed again. Look at what's missing, not just what's taken. What was missing? Beyond the obvious material wealth, what thread connected these disparate locations? The stranger had mentioned them, a detail so peculiar it had lodged itself in my memory like a splinter. He'd said they were a signature, a mark left by the perpetrator. But what did birds, carved from wood, have to do with a heist? I dismissed it as a bizarre flourish, a distraction. Now, doubt began to prickle at the edges of my resolve. I remembered the old case files, the ones I'd buried deep in my mind after it all fell apart. The serial killer, the one I'd never caught. His methods had been as precise, as unnervingly clean as these recent robberies. There had been a peculiar calling card then too, though it was different. A single pressed flower left at each scene. A stark contrast to the wooden birds, or was it? Both were deliberate, symbolic. Both spoke of a meticulous, almost artistic mind. My breath hitched. The collector of antiquities. His name. I'd seen it before somewhere. A name that had surfaced in the periphery of the old investigation, a whisper in the background noise that I dismissed as irrelevant. A name connected to a gallery, a patron of the arts, someone with a penchant for the unusual. I zoomed in on the collector's profile in the report. Mr. Silas Croft. Croft. The name resonated, a low hum of recognition. Croft. I'd heard that name in connection to a series of art thefts years ago, thefts that had never been solved. The methods were similar, no forced entry, no witnesses, just vanishing treasures. And Croft had been a prominent figure in that art world, a collector with an insatiable appetite. The jewelry store. The owner, a Mr. Sterling, was known for his collection of antique pocket watches, a passion he'd inherited from his grandfather. The bookshop. The owner, an elderly woman named M.S. Albright, specialized in rare botanical illustrations, her prized possession a first edition of Flora Botanica. And Croft. Croft's known acquisitions included a significant number of ancient navigational instruments, wooden birds, botanical illustrations, navigational instruments, pocket watches. My mind raced, trying to weave these disparate threads into a coherent pattern. It wasn't about the monetary value of the stolen items, not entirely. It was about their significance, their history, their connection to a specific kind of knowledge. The stranger had said the targets were echoes. Echoes of what? Of a past obsession, of a lost art. I thought back to the killer from my past. His victims had all been connected, not by profession or appearance, but by a shared, almost forgotten skill. A specific type of craftsmanship that had been lost to time. He'd been obsessed with preserving it, with collecting those who embodied it. There was this new perpetrator doing the same, but with objects instead of people. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the cold air suddenly feeling thin and insufficient. I leaned against the cold metal railing, my grip tight. The name felt like a key, but the lock remained stubbornly shut. He was the patron, the collector. But who was the artist? Who was the one executing these impossible heists? And how did it all tie back to the killer I'd failed to apprehend? The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the turmoil in my own soul. The international bridge during shift change, a place of transition, of comings and goings, felt like a fitting stage for this deepening mystery. The echoes were indeed getting louder. My collar was turned up, a futile gesture against the relentless chill. The city lights, a smear of neon and sodium orange, bled into the bruised twilight sky. This was where it began, and in a cruel twist of fate, this was where I felt it would end. I'd been watching him for 3 nights. He fit the profile, the unnerving precision, the quiet menace. He was the thread I'd been pulling, hoping it would unravel the whole damn tapestry. Tonight, the wind seemed to conspire with my impatience. A shift change meant a brief lull, a pocket of relative quiet before the next wave of engines roared to life. I saw my chance. He was leaning against a chain-link fence, the dim glow of a distant street lamp catching the sharp angle of his jaw. I'd seen his face on a grainy security feed from the last heist, a fleeting glimpse, a flicker of movement. Now, up close, I saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands as he lit a cigarette. "Evening," I said, my voice a low rumble, barely audible over the wind's mournful song. He flinched, the cigarette dropping from his lips to scatter sparks on the ground. His head snapped up, eyes wide, darting. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, wary and quick. "Who are I?" he rasped, his voice like gravel. "Just a concerned citizen," I lied, my gaze never leaving his. "Saw I looking a little lost?" He scoffed, a harsh, dry sound. "Ain't lost, just waiting." "For what?" I took a step closer, my hands held loosely at my sides. I didn't want to spook him, not yet. I wanted him to talk. I wanted him to slip. Took a drag from his fresh cigarette, the ember glowing like a tiny, angry eye. "For a ride. Standard procedure." "Standard procedure for what?" I pressed, my own breath catching in my throat. This was it, the echo. "The kind of work I do, it ain't exactly standard." He froze, his eyes narrowing. The casual facade began to crack, revealing something harder, something dangerous beneath. "I know about my work. I know enough," I said, my voice hardening. "I know it's neat, clean, precise, like a surgeon's scalpel, and I know it's happening again." He threw the cigarette down, grinding it under his heel. The movement was sudden, sharp. "I re mistaken. I don't know what I re talking about." "Don't I?" I took another step, closing the distance. The disappearances, the way the security systems are bypassed, the sheer audacity, it's all there, the same signature. His jaw tightened. He started to back away, his eyes scanning the empty expanse of the bridge, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "I re crazy. Am I?" I let a ghost of a smile touch my lips. "Or are I just getting sloppy? This isn't how he did things. He was artistic. I read just a hired hand, aren't I, cleaning up messes." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and charged. His face contorted, a flash of raw fury igniting in his eyes. It wasn't the fear I'd expected, but a primal rage. "I don't know anything," he spat, his voice a low growl. "I know I read afraid," I countered, pushing him. "Afraid of what happens when they catch I, afraid of who's pulling my strings." He lunged. It wasn't a calculated move, but a desperate, animalistic reaction. I was ready. Years of instinct kicked in, honed by the very failure I was trying to outrun. I sidestepped, his momentum carrying him past me. I twisted, aiming for a quick takedown, a swift end to this charade. But he was faster than he looked. As I moved, he whipped around, his arm a blur. Something hard and sharp connected with my temple. The world exploded in a blinding white flash, followed by a deep, throbbing ache. My knees buckled, and I hit the concrete with a jarring thud. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. Through the haze, I saw him standing over me, his chest heaving. His face was no longer that of a desperate man, but of someone who had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He didn't say a word. The wind howled, a mocking lament. He'd gotten away. And worse, he'd left me with a message. Not with words, but with the sharp, precise pain that throbbed behind my eyes. A warning, a promise. This was no longer just about echoes. This was about a present danger, a clear and present threat, and I had just been reminded how easily I could become a casualty. The air on the international bridge during shift change was a thick, metallic tang of exhaust fumes and the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn. My opponent's momentum was a runaway train, and I'd merely nudged him onto a different track. He stumbled, his arms flailing like tangled rigging before finding his feet again. He wasn't built for this kind of dance. Too much bulk, too little grace. "I re not him," he grunted, his voice a gravelly rasp that scraped against the din of passing trucks. I didn't answer. My focus narrowed, the world compressing to the space between us. His eyes, dark and set deep within a weathered face, held a flicker of something I recognized: desperation, yes, but also a cunning I hadn't anticipated. He was a pawn, but a remarkably well-placed one. He lunged again, this time with a crude, heavy fist. I ducked, the wind of its passage ruffling my hair. The impact would have shattered bone. This wasn't a street brawl. This was a calculated aggression, fueled by something more than mere frustration. He was trying to draw me out, to make me react, to reveal a weakness. He was testing the waters, and I was the submerged reef. He wouldn't have let me get this close. The stranger spat, circling me like a shark. The lights of the city, a glittering, indifferent sprawl on either side of the river, cast long, distorted shadows that writhed with our movements. My mind was a whirring engine, cataloging every detail: the worn leather of his jacket, the faint scent of brine clinging to him, the calluses on his hands that spoke of labor, not violence. He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. The one I were looking for, the puppet master. He's smarter than I, detective, always was. The words struck a chord, a discordant hum in the back of my skull. I'd never truly seen him, only the devastating aftermath. He lunged again, a feint this time, and then a swift jab aiming for my ribs. I deflected it, the force jarring my arm. He was surprisingly quick for his size, his movements economical, almost practiced. I think this is about I, he sneered, pressing his advantage. I rare a ghost, a relic. He's moved on, he's evolved. My breath hitched. Evolved. That was it. The heists weren't just copies, they were improvements. The meticulous planning, the flawless execution, the sheer audacity. It was the same mind, but sharpened, refined by years of absence. The killer I'd chased was now a phantom orchestrating a new kind of chaos, and this man was his instrument. I saw it then, a sliver of understanding piercing the fog of confusion. The targets weren't random. The stolen goods weren't just for profit. They were pieces of a larger puzzle, components for something else, something that mirrored the killer's twisted obsession with control, with order imposed through destruction. He caught me off guard, a sweeping kick that sent me stumbling back towards the railing. The cold metal bit into my hands as I braced myself. Below, the river churned, a black ribbon reflecting the fractured city lights. He knew my name. That was a new variable, an art in the unraveling thread. How did he know my name? Who sent I demanded, voice tight with a dangerous calm. He said I'd be persistent, said I always were. He admires that, I know, my stubbornness. It's what makes I so predictable. The bridge vibrated with the passage of a heavy transport. The shift change was in full swing, a constant stream of vehicles, each a potential witness, each a potential victim. And in the midst of this controlled chaos, the stranger was my only link to the truth. He lunged again, and this time I didn't just react. I anticipated. I saw the subtle shift in his weight, the tightening of his jaw. He was left-handed, and he was tired. He'd been waiting for this, waiting for me. I sidestepped, letting his wild swing carry him past. As he overextended, I brought my elbow down sharply on the back of his knee. He buckled, a grunt of pain escaping him. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it bought me precious seconds. "Why the bridge?" I asked, my gaze sweeping over the vast expanse of steel and concrete, the intricate web of lights stretching into the distance. "Why now?" He scrambled to his feet, his face contorted in pain and something else, anger. "It's a symbol, isn't it? Connecting two worlds, just like he is. The killer's obsession with transitions, with liminal spaces. The old case had been rife with them, abandoned train stations, forgotten tunnels, the twilight hours. And now this bridge, at the cusp of day and night, a nexus of movement and exchange. He lunged again, but his movements were slower, heavier. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was setting in. I dodged his clumsy attempt, then delivered a swift, precise strike to his temple. He staggered, his eyes rolling back. He hit the asphalt with a heavy thud, the sound swallowed by the relentless hum of traffic. I knelt beside him, the metallic tang of the bridge air now tinged with the coppery scent of blood. He was unconscious, but not broken, not yet. My eyes scanned his face, searching for a clue, a name, anything. And then I saw it, a small, faded tattoo on his wrist, barely visible beneath the grime. A stylized raven, its wings spread in flight. The raven. It had been the killer's signature, a cryptic symbol etched into the walls of his victims' lives. I dismissed it then as a taunt, a flourish. But now, seeing it on this man, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. He wasn't just a pawn. He was a follower, a devotee. My gaze drifted to the tattoo, then back to the unconscious man. The pieces were all there, scattered across the grimy concrete of the International Bridge during shift change. The heists, the methods, the symbol, and my name, spoken by a stranger. The puppet master wasn't just watching. He was playing with me, using this man to draw me back into his game, and I, like a fool, had taken the bait. This wasn't just about catching a killer anymore. This was personal. The salt-laced wind whipped at my face, a cold slap against the lingering warmth of the late afternoon sun. Below, the International Bridge during shift change was a jagged scar across the slate-gray water, a place of constant flux, of coming and going, of the in-between. It was the perfect stage for a ghost. And this ghost, this phantom thief, was beginning to feel terrifyingly real. I watched the security lights flicker on, one by one, like malevolent eyes opening in the deepening dusk. The bridge hummed with its own low thrum, the tired groan of metal under strain, the distant roar of engines. It was a symphony of transit, a place where lives intersected for mere moments before diverging again. Liminal. The word echoed in my mind, a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a jarring intrusion into the charged atmosphere. The screen glowed with an unfamiliar number. My gut tightened. This wasn't the usual anonymous tip-off or the clipped official tone of the precinct. This was something else. "Cole," I answered, my voice rougher than I intended, at bridging gaps. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the cold metal railing. "Who is this?" A low chuckle, devoid of humor, slithered down the line. Someone who appreciates my unique talents, someone who understands the beauty of a perfect transition. The voice paused, and I could almost hear the predatory stillness on the other end. "I missed one, Cole, a vital connection, and now it's time to pay the toll." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind a battlefield of warring possibilities. Who, and what connection had I missed? The heists, meticulous and bold, had always felt like a taunt, a twisted homage to the killer I'd never caught. But this felt personal, a direct strike. I started walking, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. My mind raced, replaying every detail of the previous crimes. The precise timing, the uncanny knowledge of security blind spots, the almost artistic execution. They were designed to leave no trace, to vanish like smoke. But the perpetrator had made a mistake. They had left a signature. And now, it seemed, they were leaving me a message. I reached my car, the familiar scent of stale coffee and old paper a strange comfort. I slid behind the wheel, the worn leather cool against my skin, the unknown number, the distorted voice, the emphasis on bridging gaps. It wasn't about the stolen goods anymore. It was about me. I pulled out my old case files, the ones I kept hidden away, a constant reminder of my failure. The yellowed pages, the smudged ink, the faces of the victims. I traced the killer's patterns, subtle threads that connected each crime. There was a fluidity to their movements, a preference for the edges of society, the places where people were forgotten. Abandoned warehouses, disused subway tunnels, the forgotten corners of the city. They were all transitions, spaces between here and there and the bridge, always the bridge. My gaze fell on a small, unmarked package I'd found tucked beneath my windshield wiper this morning before the call. I dismissed it as junk mail, a prank. I'd been so focused on the grander scheme, the elaborate heists, that I'd overlooked the small, intimate threat. I retrieved the package from the passenger seat. It was a plain brown envelope, no return address, just my name scrawled in a neat, almost elegant script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, tarnished silver locket. It was old, intricately engraved with a swirling pattern that I vaguely recognized, and it was familiar, too familiar. My breath hitched. I knew this locket. It belonged to her, the one person who had seen something, who had been on the cusp of identifying the killer all those years ago. She disappeared after the trial, vanishing into the anonymity of the city. I'd lost track of her, a loose end I'd never managed to tie up. The implications washed over me, a tidal wave of ice. This wasn't just about mirroring the past. This was about rewriting it. The perpetrator wasn't just playing games, they were hunting. And they had found their prey, someone connected to my past, someone I had failed to protect. The stakes had just been raised, not just for the city, but for my soul. The ghost had a name, and it was calling me to the edge. The dial tone hummed a hollow song in my ear. The stranger's voice, a gravelly whisper that promised more than it gave, had vanished, leaving me with an echo and a gnawing unease. The heists, yes, they bore the hallmarks of the ghost, the phantom who'd haunted my precinct and my sleep for too long. But the call, it felt different, personal. The ghost was a creature of pattern, a meticulous architect of chaos. My mind replayed the scant details of the latest theft, the precision, the almost surgical removal of a single, seemingly insignificant artifact from a heavily guarded private collection. It was a signature. The ghost never stole for profit. He stole. What? To prove a point, to create a narrative. I needed to think like him. Not as Cole, the disgraced detective, but as the ghost himself. What drove him? It wasn't greed. It was a performance. A grand, theatrical unveiling of societal flaws. The heists were his stage, the stolen items his props, and the city his unwilling audience. My gaze landed on the imposing steel skeleton of the International Bridge during shift change. The perpetual hum of traffic, the rumble of trucks laden with goods, the blinking lights of security patrols. It was a nexus of movement, a place where the city's pulse beat strongest, and where the ghost, if he was truly behind these recent events, might choose to make his grandest statement yet. A plan began to form, a dangerous, audacious gambit. The ghost relished the spotlight, the acknowledgement of his brilliance. He craved the audience, even if it was an audience of one. I would be that audience. I would lure him out. I spent the next few hours making calls, my voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the frantic energy coursing through me. I contacted a few old faces, people who owed me favors, people who understood the unspoken language of the underworld. I needed information, leverage, and a certain kind of, the kind that breeds anticipation. The International Bridge during shift change was a symphony of controlled chaos. The air thrummed with the exhaust of idling engines and the low murmur of weary voices as the night shift yielded to the dawn. I stood near the tall booths, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the waking city, my coat collar pulled high. The ghost wouldn't be able to resist. It was too perfect, too resonant with his twisted sense of justice. My eyes scanned the faces of the arriving workers, the truckers, the security personnel. Each one was a potential player in this deadly game. The tension was a taut string, vibrating with every passing vehicle, every distant siren. Was this a trap for me? A sleek, black car, too expensive for this hour, too nondescript for any identifiable owner, glided through the traffic, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. It stopped a short distance away, engine purring like a predatory cat. A figure emerged, cloaked in the anonymity of the fading night. Tall, slender, moving with an unnerving grace. My breath hitched. This was it. The culmination of weeks of fear, obsession, and desperate hope. The ghost, or whoever was wearing his mask. The figure approached not directly but with a circuitous path that spoke of practiced caution. I didn't move, didn't call out. The air crackled, thick with unspoken threats and the weight of past failures. As the figure drew closer, I saw it. A glint of metal in their hand, barely visible in the dim light. Not a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was a small, ornate lockpick, the kind that required immense skill and a delicate touch. The ghost's signature. Then the figure spoke, their voice a low, measured tone that sent a jolt through me. The trap had sprung, but it wasn't the one I'd set. The ghost wasn't a singular entity. The International Bridge during shift change, a stage for my downfall. The biting wind whipped strands of my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. Below, the river churned, a dark, indifferent beast swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. The International Bridge during shift change was a symphony of roaring engines and echoing horns, a cacophony that usually grated on my nerves. Tonight, it was a lullaby, a deceptive peace before the storm I'd foolishly invited. My breath hitched, misting in the frigid air. The trap. It wasn't just sprung. It had been laid with a precision that made my gut clench. I'd been so focused on the ghost, on the phantom killer, that I'd forgotten the most basic tenet of my former life. Shadows rarely walk alone. The ghost wasn't a singular entity. A metallic clang echoed from the maintenance access tunnel beneath the pedestrian walkway. My muscles tensed, a coiled spring ready to snap. I'd gambled, betting on the ghost's ego, on his need to play the game, and he'd called my bluff. Clever Cole. A voice slithered through the wind, low and resonant, like stones grinding together. This was smooth, cultured, a predator in disguise. I edged closer to the railing, my gaze sweeping the sparse figures hurrying across the bridge. A lone security guard, his uniform a beacon of misplaced authority, patrolled his usual route. A couple heads bowed against the wind, their world confined to their shared space. No one else. You expected me to come alone. The voice chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. After all this time, you still underestimate the power of a team. A team. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The ghost wasn't just one man. He was an organization. This wasn't a vendetta. It was a business. Where are they? I demanded, my voice tight, betraying none of the tremor that ran through me. Where they need to be, Cole, securing our future. And yours, the voice purred. A tidy sum, enough to erase the past, enough to start anew. All you have to do is step aside. My fingers tightened around the worn leather of my glove. Step aside. After everything. After the lives lost, the families shattered, the years I'd spent drowning in regret. The ghost had orchestrated this, using the bridge, the very symbol of connection and transition, as his grand finale. It was a perverse masterpiece, and I was about to become a casualty of its completion. He moved with an unnerving grace, his face obscured by the dim light and the shadow of his cap. The offer stands, Cole, the voice said, now closer, emanating from the man's direction. One last chance. My eyes flicked to the guard, still oblivious a few dozen yards away. The couple had disappeared into the city's embrace. I was alone, truly alone, with the architect of my ruin. I don't take offers from cowards, I spat, the words a ragged sound. The man didn't flinch. He raised his pistol not at me, but at the railing. A sharp crack, barely audible above the traffic, and a section of the metal warped inward, a smoking hole appearing as if by magic. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. He wasn't playing. Last warning, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I took a step back, my gaze never leaving him. The wind howled, a mournful dirge. This was it. The culmination of years of guilt, of sleepless nights, of a desperate, consuming need for redemption. The ghost had lured me into his lair, and now the final act was about to unfold. My gaze fell on a discarded cigarette butt near my feet, a brand I recognized. Not from the ghost's supposed signature, but from a different case, a low-level enforcer I'd put away years ago. A ghost of a memory, a detail that shouldn't be here. It was a flicker of dissonance in the otherwise perfect symphony of the ghost's orchestration. Then, a faint glint of metal caught my eye, tucked beneath the railing where the man had shot. It was a small, intricate piece of jewelry, a woman's earring. My mind reeled. The ghost, the meticulous planner, the phantom. Would he wear such a thing? And the enforcer's cigarette. It was too much. The pieces, so carefully arranged, were beginning to shift, revealing a picture far more complex, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The voice, the man, the plan, it was all a performance. But who was the true actor? And who was the unwitting pawn? The man advanced, his steps measured, deliberate. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of exhaust fumes and something else. Something metallic and sharp. Blood, not mine, not yet. He raised his weapon again. This time his aim was steady, unwavering. This wasn't just about catching a killer anymore. It was about exposing a lie, about dismantling a carefully constructed facade. And I, Cole, was going to be the one to tear it all down. I braced myself, not for a fight, but for a revelation. And this man, this instrument of his will, was about to become the first domino to fall. The metallic tang of exhaust fumes choked the air, a bitter perfume on this wind-whipped edge of the world. Rain slicked the asphalt of the international bridge during shift change, turning the stark, industrial lights into smeared, bleeding watercolors. I'd been so sure of the trap, so certain I had the architect cornered. But the architect, it seemed, had always been the one holding the blueprint. The man before me, the one who had orchestrated the symphony of my downfall, didn't flinch. His hand, steady as a surgeon's, held the pistol. I saw the glint of the barrel, the promise of oblivion. My breath hitched, a desperate bird caught in my ribs. "I don't take offers from cowards," I spat, the words a ragged sound, torn from a throat gone dry. He didn't flinch. He raised his pistol, not a threat, but a statement. And then, the sound that ripped through the night was not the sharp crack of a gunshot, but the piercing wail of sirens, growing closer, an unstoppable tide. My head snapped up. Through the downpour, I saw them, the flashing blue and red lights, multiplying, converging. My trap or his. The man holding the gun, the ghost from my past, simply lowered it. A slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes. He turned, not to flee, but to face the approaching chaos, a strange, almost serene acceptance in his posture. I watched him, my mind a frantic scramble. Had he known? Had he anticipated this? The first patrol car screeched to a halt, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. Uniformed figures spilled out, weapons drawn, their faces grim masks in the storm. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding us, their shouts lost in the wind and rain. I was aware of hands on me, firm but not rough, guiding me away from the architect. He offered no resistance. He simply stood, a statue carved from shadow, as they cuffed him. As they led him past me, his eyes met mine. There was no triumph, no malice, only a profound weariness, a reflection of my own. He opened his mouth, and I leaned in, expecting a confession, a final taunt, a cryptic clue. "It was never about I, Cole," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. "It was always about the system, loose thread." The detective, a stern-faced woman with eyes that had seen too much, approached me. "You all right, Cole?" he asked, his voice sharp but not unkind. He was meticulous, brilliant even, but arrogant. He left just enough breadcrumbs, just enough. Patterns, enough for someone who knew what to look for. She paused, her gaze finally settling on me. Someone like I. I looked back at the empty stretch of the International Bridge during shift change, the rain now a steady downpour, washing away the night's grime. The architect was caught. The case was closed. The ghost that had haunted my waking hours and infiltrated my dreams was finally laid to rest. The detective offered me a ride back. I declined. The walk, I decided, was necessary. Each step on the slick pavement was a deliberate act of moving forward. He had become the measure of my worth, the architect of my self-destruction. And now, with him gone, who was I? The rain continued, a baptism of sorts. It cleansed the grime, the fear, the lingering scent of defeat. The pattern was broken. The cycle was complete. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet stirrings of possibility, not as a disgraced former detective, but as Cole, just Cole. The path ahead was uncertain, shrouded in the mist of my own making, but for the first time it felt like mine to walk. The architect of my ruin was behind bars. Now, it was time to build something new from the wreckage.